Hello, KCIW listeners, and welcome to Curry Café, where we put together a panel of volunteers and guests who discuss various topics from whimsical and fun to more serious subjects.
Well, hello everybody. This is Ray Garry, your host for the Curry Café, again this week. And Rick wasn't quite telling the truth there. We don't really have much of a panel today. It seems as though various little sicknesses have put away a lot of our people, and we only have one person along with me, but fortunately that one person is absolutely brilliant and is very conversant on many subjects, to include Jimmy Carter. So maybe we'll have the guest introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Robert O'Sullivan, and I kind of had two major parts of my adult life. The first major part involved politics and media for 20, 30 years, and then the next part involved teaching high school, and I was also a pastor part-time during those years as well. And so I come from the perspective of someone who was pretty actively involved politically, mainly in California, at the time when Jimmy Carter appeared on the scene. And also later as a social studies teacher, I taught U.S. history and I taught civics. And so I was actively involved in following the news over the years and interpreting them, and have my own kind of just basic perception on the Carter years and what's happened since and what happened before.
Okay, it sounds like we could probably bleed a little bit of knowledge out of him today. I'm going to start off with a little story, I guess, about me and Jimmy Carter. I actually spoke to Jimmy Carter on the phone once. Several years ago, quite a few years ago now, a group I was involved with making up a gift basket to give to him when he was going to be in Alaska for the celebration of the Anilka Treaty, which was an environmental thing that he did for Alaska. And they decided they wanted to do a gift basket containing all or some of the crafts that some of these people made. At the time, I had a business making jewelry boxes and gift boxes and chests and things of that nature. And I said, well, I can't make a basket, but I can put together a box that I think will work. So I had a subscription at the time to fine woodworking, and I had just finished making a blanket chest for myself from one of the plans in there, and I just said, well, I can just make a smaller version of this, and I don't know. The one I made was a blanket chest. I don't know what you'd put in this one, like a linen chest. But anyway, it got sent to him. And when he got to his room in Anchorage, he went in there and saw this box full of all the things. My wife made some jams that she was well known for in the community, and people put all sorts of things in there. And he didn't realize that the box was actually part of the gift. He just thought it was something to keep all these things in. Well, it turns out that at the dinner that night, he was sitting close to some people who knew me and knew about the box, and they mentioned it to him, and he said, oh, yeah, he says, that's really nice, or something along those lines. And he brought people up from the dinner to his room to show it to him. And I thought, well, that's kind of nice. And I actually thought that people of that stature get presents all the time, and maybe this would be a good thing to have out in the barn, that his cat could have kittens in or something like that. But no, he really appreciated it. So, okay, and then within a few days or a week or so, I got the obligatory thank you letter, which was not a form letter. It was actually written to me about this box, and then Rosalind made a little note on the bottom how much she liked it, and I thought something I cherish to this day, obviously. And then it wasn't over yet. About a week later, I was working out in the shop, which was about 100 yards from the house, my wife came running out to say, "You have to get back to the house right now. Jimmy Carter's going to call you." And I said, "Yeah, right." And he's going to have,
Sure.
have Frosty the Snowman with him too. But anyway, she finally convinced me, and I did get back to the house. And what had happened is, working at her desk, she screens the calls coming in through the answering machine, and this call came in, and she was kind of half paying attention. She says, "I'm a woman on the phone said I'm a representative of former President Carter, and he would like to speak to Mr. Garry." And that's when the tape went click after that, because she immediately picked up the phone, of course. Anyway, I did get back to the house, and he had some questions about the box, and I know that he's a very avid woodworker himself, and we chatted for a little while about woodworking and that, and it was quite an experience. I was a little hero in my hometown there, my Alaska town of 500 people, when the word got out. Anyway, that's my Jimmy Carter story. I'm sticking to it, and I have a witness. So anyway. Let's see. Hold on. I spent a good part of the morning making notes with this show, and of course, this sitting on my desk at home. So I had to whip some others up here. Jimmy Carter first got into politics, running for Senate, I think, and he was in the state of Georgia, and he was running on at least partially on an integration platform, which in those days in Georgia, you would think would be political suicide, but it wasn't. It actually worked for him. He was able to gather quite a few celebrities to assist him, people like the Allman Brothers and some others, and evidently won over the electorate because he did win, and then he ran for governor. And then, to the surprise of everybody, he ran for president. Everybody's saying, "Jimmy who?" Because being the governor of Georgia in those days, you didn't necessarily get a whole lot of publicity. And to everybody's shock, he actually won. And one of the things he ran on that I thought was interesting is that he was going to be totally honest. He would never lie to you, to the people, and things like that, he said. And during the eulogy that was on television last week, almost everybody who spoke to his honesty and how he didn't lie, and that was going to be his the thing he would kind of live on. And I was wondering, of course, our new president-elect was sitting there in the seats, and I was wondering, first of all, were all these people deliberately mentioning honesty as a jab to him, and how did he feel about sitting there and hearing these words, "tell the truth," things like that he doesn't seem to have much knowledge about. So he was the 39th president. He was only served one term, and historians call his they're not really excited about his presidency. One of the problems he had very soon was that he was honest, and he wasn't willing to do something for just for its political value. He would always want it to have a real purpose, not just something as a show. And here's something I seem to remember this, and Bob, maybe you know the truth. Did he stop playing "Hail to the Chief"?
When he became president, he asked that it not be played at events. I understand that after 3 years, somebody for some event convinced them that it should be played, but he did not like or care for much of the pomp and circumstances that go with the office. I wonder if I could give a little more background on Carter. You sort of started when he got political, and he had done quite a bit before that time. He was born in Georgia, small town of Plains, and actually his family for a long time lived in an even smaller, if there's such a thing as a suburb of Plains, there was sort of it. And interestingly, both in Plains and especially in that suburb, many of the people living there were African Americans. And unlike many people in the South, he had a lot of just plain contact, playing with and all that as a child with more African Americans than white people. And I never met the man or knew him, but clearly that was somewhat unusual for a white person in the South.
And his father was a segregationist, by the way, but didn't object to him playing with his black friends.
Yeah, and his mother was a nurse who kind of, you might say in those days, was a public health nurse to the small black community in that area. And so the kind of natural contacts between races that hopefully in many cases improve things was happening in that family, at least with his mother, and but also was just part of shaping who he was as a human being. The child is father of the man, one poet once said, and the child Jimmy Carter was part of a unusual childhood that definitely shaped him. He was clearly very bright. He did well in school. He first went to, I believe, a state college in Georgia, and then went to Georgia Tech, and then was accepted at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And I don't know about all of that goes into all of that, but clearly the man had some smarts. He served in the Navy for quite a while, became an assistant.
9 years active.
And became a close associate with Admiral Rickover in the development of atomic submarines, and himself was a submarine captain for a while. And but then his father died, and he felt he had to deal with family farm issues. There was a peanut farm to deal with and other things. So he didn't serve very long in the Navy, but he certainly made his mark there. He was involved in the peanut business, and also there was, I believe, a little small store and things like that were part of the family business. And his first running for office had to do with the local school board and then the Georgia State Senate. And although he personally was a fairly non-racist person, he didn't necessarily let that be known as a candidate early on. And indeed, there's some troubled parts of that era in his life. But he then ran for governor against a famous axe-wielding restaurateur named, what was his name? Can't think of it right now. But anyway, he lost. This was a man who advised that if anyone with a black person came into his restaurant, just chase him out with an axe handle. And the senator there was Herman Talmadge, and that was I'm still having trouble with his name.
This restaurant owner was very proud of that. In fact, I think he had a T-shirt or a sign or something indicating that. Kind of hard to believe there were actually times like that.
Well, it's kind of hard to believe that things like that are still going on in these times.
Yeah.
And things have not changed as much as many of us would think. Back when he was a candidate, I was working in the California legislature for an assemblywoman and was involved in the Democratic State Central Committee in California. And I remember when Jimmy Carter appeared to speak at that early on in his candidacy, I couldn't help but react the same way that a lot of people did when they saw his face and his smile. And that was, and I kind of giggled to myself when I saw him maybe 10 feet away in person, that what was said of him was his hair, which was sort of a reddish-brownish, slightly blondish, big hair sort of thing, made some people think he looked a little like John F. Kennedy if John F. Kennedy had been somehow merged with Howdy Doody. And I could never quite escape that image of him because there was a little of the charismatic, handsome dude on top, but there was also the guy with the big peanut butter living smile on the bottom half of his face.
That was a major part of his caricature was his teeth. And didn't Teddy Roosevelt had the same thing, didn't he, with the caricature? He was always showing his teeth. But yeah, I watched a program about Carter the other night, the rock and roll president, and that's the thing that always just kind of jumps. If there's 15 people in the room and he shows those teeth, that's you're attracted to that. And he, being the rock and roll president, as he I guess was later term, he was able to get people like the Allman Brothers and who's the other guy? Willie Nelson on his side, which certainly helped his campaign. And he loves to tell the story about that Willie Nelson had in his book about visiting in the White House, and said up in his room he was smoking dope with some of the service staff there. And so Carter corrected that. He said it was not the service staff, it was his son. So he was one of the very early people, I think, in national prominence that was in favor of legalizing marijuana. He never did say whether he smoked it himself or not. I don't know if I can't imagine that he didn't at least try it.
The story about the son has to do with going under the roof of the White House to smoke.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, he did favor decriminalization, but as on a lot of things, he was pretty far ahead of his time. He certainly brought up major issues about energy, about conservation, about environmental protection. And if he had been heeded more from the time he was president, which was, 40 years ago now, this place would be a much better country.
I went to the Carter Center, and it has all the usual things you would expect. And one of the exhibits there is a small room, and they have things on the wall and whatever about some of his ideas and some of the things he wanted to do for the environment. And I can remember at the time thinking that, boy, if we'd have done just half of these things, we would be in a lot better shape than we are now. And that was 25 years or 30 years ago. So he put a demonstration project, I guess it was, of solar panels on the roof of the White House. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that Reagan did was take them down, saying that he wanted to turn the White House into a birdhouse. And he didn't make a whole lot of friends with the people working in the White House in regard to the temperature he wanted to keep it at. In the wintertime, it was set at 64 degrees, and people were freezing, as they thought. I don't know, that's where I keep the temperature at my house. Except when people come to visit, they want to leave their coat on and ask if I have some gloves they can wear, so I turn it up to 68 then. Oh yeah, okay, I've just been reminded, if you want to participate in this, you can text us at 541-661-4098. 541-661-4098. Now, as I said before, we were suffering from some illnesses, so we don't have the usual amount of operators standing by to receive this text, but we will get you in. Just be patient.
One thing about Jimmy Carter is he was so different from other occupants of the White House and There was actually no 20th century president that had the lack of Washington political background as part of his life, or the only person in the 20th century who just kind of came in blue without any involvement as a congressman or a senator was Woodrow Wilson. But Carter was a very different type person than most politicians. He was unusual in that in some ways he had excellent political skills, but in other contexts he had very underdeveloped, let's say, political skills. He was apparently really remarkable one-on-one when he was campaigning. He would go to places and just even in New England and just stand on the street and hand out literature and say, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Carter running for president." And you don't quite see that kind of thing happening anymore. Usually candidate events are staged in great detail. But he was also good in kind of a small room or a context, a town hall meeting, that sort of thing. But in bigger contexts, he was not that effective as an orator or as someone who would move people in the same way that some other political figures can. And he was also a stranger to Washington. He had been governor of a southern state, but that's a very different context from what Washington was like. And he didn't enjoy or even work on the skills that were pretty important in developing relationships in Washington with the leadership of the Senate and the leadership of the House, Tip O'Neill at that time. And Tip O'Neill in some ways had a better relationship with Ronald Reagan than they did with Jimmy Carter, just because of kind of a different set of personal skills. Carter was also quite open about his Christian faith and was quite serious in his following it. He was teaching Bible classes until he was like 98 or something like that. And always when people saw this new figure on the political landscape, they were suddenly seeing someone who was evangelical Christian who was willing to talk his faith even in the public sphere, but also someone who kind of understood the Christian gospel much better than most evangelicals do, and that he was one who was saying that the Christian message has a lot to do with being kind to your neighbor and being concerned about feeding the hungry and clothing the naked and so forth. And it was a part of his personality as president and part of his post-presidency when he was so involved in the Carter Center and working for human rights and working for building with Habitat for Humanity and other groups and other ways, translating an understanding of his faith as one that involved trying to make this life on this earth a better place to be for everyone. And he did some rather remarkable things. The guinea worm was something that at one point was killing 15 million people a year in tropical areas in Africa and New Guinea and other places. But after the Carter Center started figuring out ways to organize people to fight the guinea worm, one that was so deadly for a while was now almost totally eliminated. It's down to like 150 cases a year.
Isn't that, if I remember correctly, that was taken care of or dealt with by just applying a simple filter to the drinking water? Is that right? Or is there more to it than that?
I don't quite know the details, but it was something that could be eliminated.
And somebody could do it right at the riverside.
But it had to do with training people, number one, to get decent water to start with, and and all that was in. So training people without much education to be kind of public health experts is not easy, but it was something the Carter Center figured out what to do. And on the human rights score, quite a few elections all over the world were much cleaner and appropriately performed because of the observers and people that the Carter Center sent to them. He wasn't always perfect on human rights, but he, especially through the Carter Center, pursued that in many different ways quite positively.
Our current president-elect is talking about taking control of the Panama Canal again. Now, if I remember the Panama Canal story, they wanted to build a canal there, and there was two countries, and I can't remember the name of them. One of them, I guess, was Panama, and the country just north of that did not want to relinquish the land to do this, and Teddy Roosevelt just arranged for there to be a revolt and have the country separate, and then they were able to use the land to build a canal. But there was a treaty that we would run the canal for, I think it was 100 years, and then it would revert back to the people in the country there. And at the time, that was a big deal, and a lot of our people did not want to relinquish it. But I guess Jimmy Carter said, "Well, that's the deal." And they get there.
And also, there was a revolt going on in Panama, related largely to the issue of who owns and runs the canal.
So maybe we'll in line for another one of those coming up. I don't know.
Well, it's hard to interpret the mind of the president-elect.
Yes. I don't know if he's going to do that first or annex Canada.
Who knows? Or Greenland.
Why he thinks that would be possible or would work? Or I spent some time in Canada and with Canadians, and I don't remember ever meeting one that said, "Gee, I wish I was an American."
Talking about Carter as an outsider, where this was probably most difficult had to do with foreign affairs. He was a Navy officer, so he had some experience beyond the country as to the American presence, but he was not really trained in foreign affairs or knew the type of people who'd long dominated a kind of often bipartisan foreign affairs that was controlled by members from both parties, but also kind of a foreign policy establishment, much of which was centered around some of the Ivy League schools. And a lot of people thought that he was some kind of hick from Georgia and didn't know much about the real world. And when it came time to bring people into his administration, many of them were people that had been involved in Georgia, either in the politics of his campaigns there or in the governor's office, and they were certainly not people trained in foreign affairs, and nor in the ways of Washington, where much of, especially in those days, took place informally in dinners and bars and in ways and places where alcohol flew freely. Does alcohol flow? What's the past tense of flow?
Well, I think it flows, and then after a few hours, it probably flies.
Or ferments or whatever. But anyway, and what happened is at those days there was a predominant kind of establishment organization called the Trilateral Commission of experts in the area of foreign affairs who had their own agenda Much of it had to do with helping American capitalism, especially as it related to oil and energy. But it also had the agenda of kind of continuing the place that the United States had in the world for much of the 20th century. And many Americans nowadays don't really think of America as an imperial power, but think about the way in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, we had such a predominant presence in Cuba, in Panama, in much of the Western Hemisphere, and it was often for the benefit of things like the United Fruit Company and other agricultural people and others who just saw places like Cuba or anywhere in the third world as places to control and dominate and get their raw materials out to our country so we can make products to sell to other countries. And much of American success in the 20th century was related to our being a colonial power, including the Philippines. Most people don't even recognize how terrible our presence there was for a long time.
Oh, it was awful.
And many Americans ignored it or didn't care, and only a few, like Mark Twain, were willing to speak out against it. But Carter, I don't know quite how he developed it, but had a sense of human rights that was anti-colonial and recognized that it's not the Americans' job to tell people all over the world how to live. However, the Trilateral Commission and other leaders in foreign policy had very different ideas, and they didn't overcome them very well.
One of the things he did on his second day in office that didn't sit with me all that well was he forgave or vindicated all the people who had avoided the draft to go to Vietnam. And being a veteran, I wasn't too thrilled with anybody cutting slack to people who avoided the draft, or not. I think it avoided, but I didn't feel too. The people that went to Canada, at least they did something other than just not go.
I'm of the age that I was subject to the draft, and in my own particular case, I got a 4D exemption that was for a divinity student. I happened to have trained for the ministry back in those days, and but if I hadn't had that, I would have refused the draft, and I indeed actively helped someone avoid the draft because we had no business doing what we were doing in Vietnam. And most American young people had no idea where Vietnam was, what the battle was about, and they were just cannon fodder. And it so has continued to disrupt this nation's life ever since. And so I'm glad that Carter did forgive those people of their defiance. I found my own ways of not being involved in the war, although I did wind up being in Nigeria for a couple of years around those days, and a war broke out there. So anyway, but if you have a sense of personal liberty and human rights, do you really believe that the government should have the right to draft you to become a soldier or a sailor or what have you, or should that be a voluntary thing? And it's been a voluntary thing now for a good 40 years.
But we haven't gotten to the point to where we needed those kind of people, that many people, I guess.
Well, why didn't we need it? Because we were in Vietnam for wrong reasons.
Exactly.
That's not a need. That's a choice.
When I was drafted, I didn't like it. When I found out I was going to Vietnam, I liked that even less. I kind of my one good thing about that is I was a medic, and I thought, well, gee, I won't have to go there to kill people. It'll be just the opposite. Mm-hmm. Turned out to not exactly be the truth. In Vietnam, if you were a medic, you were a rifleman until somebody got hurt. But my thinking at the time would not have been in favor of draft dodgers or whatever. I was very politically and historically naive. And once I started learning the truth about what Vietnam was all about, I was kind of sickened, and I'm still sickened to this day. I honestly believed that we were saving the world for democracy, and if we didn't fight them there, we would have to fight them here. And a friend of mine and me very frequently point out the fact that we were successful in not having to fight them here, because I have yet to see a sampan coming up on Harris Beach or any other beaches in this country. So we won that part, but Vietnam is booming now from what I see of it, and they're just having a grand old time.
Going back to Jimmy Carter a bit, I don't know if you know it, but the fact that it's required that American-sold cars have seatbelts was a result of Jimmy Carter.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That it was something that had congressional legislation which required states that if you want to get gasoline funds or federal funds for you have to require seatbelts, and that saved, I'm sure, thousands of lives.
Yeah, I bought my first new car in 1965, and it was an accessory. I had to order it.
Uh-huh.
And it was just belts. It wasn't the shoulder harness and all that we have today.
And environmentally, he certainly called into question the dominance of the oil industry in our economy and in the lifestyles of people. If you could keep buying gas real cheaply and had cars that could get you to go easily fairly long distances, the American lifestyle became more and more dependent on oil and automobiles in ways that might have been very different if more public transit and less automobiles and less of those fuels going into the atmosphere would make for a healthier planet right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Operator is telling me that we have a text. Let's hear what is on the line.
Yeah, this text is from Rick McNamer, who's one of our very frequent panelists and who's under the weather today, so couldn't make it, but he did text in. President Carter was my favorite all-time president, with President Obama a very close second. Both of them are the antithesis of the adjudicated rapist and convicted felons sadly coming to power soon. Carter's humble honesty and compassion somehow elicited the cruel juvenile jabs from blowhards like Limbaugh. He was a gem in my opinion.
And by the way, historically, around the time that Carter was emerging, so was talk radio.
Yes.
And the likes of Limbaugh was probably the most egregious example of that. But it became a way in which a lot of people were getting unfiltered information incorrectly, but they were filling the airwaves. Or I don't know if Limbaugh was on for something like 2 or 3 hours a day, but you could hear it all over the country on thousands of stations.
And his ilk.
And his ilk.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, news was becoming entertainment. It wasn't necessarily news. And
whatever sold stuff for the commercials.
I watch I don't think they even call it a news program anymore, and I've stopped. I'm trying to wean myself from it. It's the news show that has Gail, can't think of her last name right now. And they will run through the first, I think it's a 2-hour show. In the first 15, 20 minutes, they'll run through some stories that are of note. I mean, the more glamorous ones or interesting ones, they'll spend more time on. And then they go right from that to interviewing somebody who recently wrote a book or is in a movie coming up. Yeah, the news has become entertainment. It's not news at all anymore, or very little.
But until the talk radio phenomenon became so prevalent, we had basically 3 commercial networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and we had PBS, and there wasn't a whole lot else in way of information sources until cable developed, and around the same time was when all the talk radio was developing.
And then all the, not all, but many of the news services, what we consider to be reliable or legitimate, were starting to pick up political bents. Now you can watch this channel because it's going to have a liberal bent or it's going to have a conservative bent or whatever. I have a hard time trying to avoid that because I don't want either one of them. I know a lot of my friends watch Rachel Maddow, and I used to listen to her when she was on Air America, and she's an absolutely brilliant person. And I would be surprised if she was very far to the left or inaccurately to the left, but I just don't want to watch somebody who has that direction they're going in, regardless of what it is.
I have trouble with her style of repeating herself.
Like I said,
I say that again. I have trouble with her problem of repeating herself.
She repeats herself.
Oh, yes, she does.
Okay.
So do I sometimes.
Now you made me lose my train of thought here. Anyway, she was brilliant when she had her radio show. It was just Air America didn't last very long. It was radio talk shows that had exclusively liberal commentators or guests or whatever, and she was one of the better ones. I mean, she has a doctorate in political science, I believe it is, and
I think she went to Stanford. She's from Castro Valley, California, originally. So, when I was talking about Carter in Foreign Affairs, where his talk about human rights was sadly ignored, had to do with El Salvador and some of the rebellions going on in Central America. In many ways, for the longest time, American politics, especially in Central America, was propping up military dictatorships that were thought by American foreign policy experts to be the last bulwark against communist expansion from Cuba.
What was the name of the school that we used to train these people at? And I think it's gone now. It was in one of our military bases.
School for Americas or something.
Something like that,
there were many military officers from throughout the kind of dictatorial Latin American countries that were getting special training by the U.S. at a U.S. base to keep suppressing human rights agitators who were trying to get out from under the control of the likes of the United Fruit Company.
I was kind of amused when I can't think of his name right now. That's got to be the current president-elect. When he was
his family name was Frump. I think he changed it somewhere along the line.
Anyway, when he was elected the first time, there was all this hoopla about the idea that there would be a foreign government interfering in the elections of a free nation, and I thought, well, I guess these people doing all this have never heard of Central America and South America, where we might have stuck our nose in a little bit here and there. More
than our nose, our bucks and our bangs and all that.
Back in the days when somebody got elected that we didn't like, they shouldn't have gotten airplanes because they crashed a lot and things like that. It was almost as bad as Putin. Maybe it was worse. I don't know. Oh boy, we have another text.
This is from a listener. I'm enjoying the Curry Café discussion with Robert O'Sullivan about Jimmy Carter. You mentioned that Carter grew up with many black friends reminded me of my family's home in San Francisco, where in my teenage years, our family is one of the only white families in a predominantly black neighborhood.
Well,
Is that the extent of the, or is it more?
That's the extent of it.
Yeah. Well, I still think that the more people from different backgrounds in natural ways get to know each other in school and jobs and neighborhoods and sports and music, the more that happens, that there's better understanding in most cases between the races.
The theory behind busing
That was
back in the 70s when they were busing people
Yeah.
back and forth. That was
another thing where Carter was not quite truthful about his own beliefs sometimes.
oh really?
Yeah, he
Does that still exist? Are they still busing people around?
in some places, yes, and you'll. I haven't had enough experience to speak authoritatively on this, but I think in most communities, you'll still find that the richer part of the community often has their children go to a better high school than the poorer part of the community, and that's not been resolved much through busing. And interestingly, this is not known about our current president, but he was a avid foe of busing in his younger days. And in fact, there was, although Biden was the first senator to come out in favor of Jimmy Carter, they later disagreed about a law in Delaware that would have banned busing. So neither of them come out looking really good on that issue back from those days.
That's kind of a tough issue to sell because you can. A lot of people move to certain neighborhoods because they have good schools, and that's the reason you pay way more for the house and taxes and things like that, and then you find out that your kid's not going to go to that good school. I don't know. I assume that's been resolved in some way.
Not in many ways, because the real resolution of it has to do with what state funding is involved in schools in just about every state. Most school districts get an overwhelming amount of their money from the state government, some from the feds and some from private sources. And you can deal with issues of inequality by just funding the poorer schools better. Now, I worked as a high school teacher for over 20 years in Oakland, and you would think that's a very highly integrated community. It's got a history of black mayors and black council members and all that. But yet the one high school up in the hills is much better equipped and much better staffed than the lowland, flatlands of Oakland. They're generally called high schools that are still overwhelmingly dominated by certain races, in some cases Hispanic and some cases black.
I would think it's maybe it's not common sense, but it seems like it is to me that if my kid was going to school in Brentwood, he'd probably be in a much better school than if my kid was going in Compton.
For sure. That's probably generally true nationwide. But that has to do with funds. And if the state of California really wanted to amp up the funds for poor schools, they could do it, but they haven't. And there have been court cases which tell them to, and yet they kind of do it a little, and it's
still you can't throw money at all the problems.
Well,
in many cases you can, though.
But in those, often in educational cases, you can. And transportation, whether by busing or by public transport, is part of all that, and it depends on the geography of the city where you're talking about the schools existing.
Well, it's a difficult problem to resolve. I think if I were, I bought my $4 million house and in a neighborhood that was $4 million houses, that's one of the first things I would be looking at, is the fact that I would think the educational system would be better.
Sure.
Oh, boy.
This is a place for textual intercourse.
Yes.
Okay, listener.
That's not the type of thing we talk about around here on the radio, Bob. Okay.
Please strike that.
Okay.
Listener wrote in, I tuned in late. Maybe you already discussed President Carter and the ANILCA, which was adopted in 1980. Jimmy Carter is considered a hero to many Native Americans, particularly in Alaska, because he signed the Alaska National Interest Lands Conservation Act into law, which protected vast swaths of Alaskan wilderness, while simultaneously safeguarding the subsistence hunting and fishing rights of indigenous communities, allowing them to continue their traditional way of life on the land they've always inhabited.
He would, and that be a hero to a lot of people, but I don't know how popular he actually was in Alaska, because if you mention environmentalists to the average Alaskan, you probably better duck, because it's a very high percentage of the population there that wants nothing to do with that. That means we can't drill for oil, or we can't go kill a moose when we want, or whatever. I don't know. I'm hoping things have gotten better since I left.
Yeah. Carter generally was much better on American Indian issues than most other presidents.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that was he was coming to Anchorage for the anniversary of that of that treaty. That's when I got to give him the box. I don't remember how it happened, but he was going to go fishing while he was there, and I talked to the guide. I can't remember where I met him, but he says, yeah, he did the same. He said he called up about a week before and wanted to know, what should I bring and this and that. Just like a regular person, which you don't generally expect from people like that.
So, there was mention of Carter as being the rock and roll president, and that struck a lot of people as fairly odd, because you don't necessarily associate evangelical Christians with rock and roll, and sex and drugs and things that often were thought to go with them.
And Willie Nelson.
And Willie Nelson and the Allman Brothers. But even more, in a way, prominent in that rock and roll context for him was Rolling Stone magazine. Rolling Stone magazine got started in, I guess, late 60s, early 70s, but became a really dominant means of communication among young people and music fans and general cultural fans. And Hunter Thompson often wrote for it. And in fact, Carter had some incidents involving Hunter Thompson that were pretty bizarre. But Hunter Thompson in those days was kind of a wildly unusual journalist who was writing
read the first couple of chapters in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
Yeah, there's a movie out on it too. And it really was a lot of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And in one case, I'm not sure if I have these facts all straight, but I think Thompson got kind of drunk or high in one way or another around Carter.
That would be shocking.
And there was some sort of falling out, and allegedly Thompson spilled lighter fluid outside the door of Carter's aide, Jordan, I believe it was, and tried to set his motel room on fire because of this misunderstanding between Carter and Hunter Thompson.
Must have been a hell of a misunderstanding.
I guess. Well, Carter was not an abstainer from alcohol, but he was much more likely to serve beer or wine at events than harder stuff. And one thing that I only got to realize quite a bit when I was on the inside of politics is, at least in those days, there was an awful lot of alcohol that was flowing in the process of rubber chicken dinners and cocktail parties and little private sessions in clubs between leaders. And Carter was not into alcohol, and part of his whole kind of just plain not fitting in Washington was he just didn't fit in the whole political scheme of things, of how, at least in the Democratic Party, things got done.
He, on this rock and roll president show that was recently on, I can't remember. I was thinking when you were talking that it was Hunter Thompson, but I think it might have been Greg Allman, was talking about how they would get together and then they'd open a bottle of scotch and kill it. And he said, well, they would get together, but he said he'd
maybe
kind of limited himself to
half a shot.
One drink a day was his limit. So I guess if you're finishing a bottle, you probably figure everybody else is
would be happy to, yeah. Well, I see we have about 3 minutes or so.
Oh, we're getting that close. Okay, well, we've kind of, because there's just two of us and there's usually four, we've kind of struggled through this a little bit, but I think we didn't repeat ourselves too much, and
you can say that again,
and cover the subject pretty well. But no, I was going to say it'd be interesting to have a Carter hater here, but no, it wouldn't. Typically,
yeah. Interestingly, in my own life, I was handling press for another presidential candidate when Carter was running. That was Mo Udall, or Morris Udall, who was a congressman from Arizona. His brother had been Secretary of the Interior for John F. Kennedy. And in Udall's case, he was thought to be the left's progressive alternative to Carter. There had been other prominent politicians that were in the race for a while but pulled out for reasons sometimes personal, sometimes related to scandal and what have you. And at one point, it looked like the race was between Carter and Udall. And Udall was expecting to be doing well in Wisconsin, which had a real progressive tradition, of course, as well as an ugly McCarthyite tradition as well. But I remember I was handling Udall's California press at the time, going to bed that night with Udall having a slight lead in the Wisconsin primary, and then waking up the next morning and learning he had lost by 500 votes or so and was withdrawing from the race. And I was looking for a new job again, which was something that was part of being a political guy in those days.
I think since then we've learned not to trust polls at all. I think at least I have.
Trust whom?
Polls.
Polls, yeah.
They don't seem to mean much of anything, really.
Well, polls used to be done, as I understood it, often by they're simply calling up people at random.
Yes.
But now with cell phones...
Focus groups.
Well, focus groups are perhaps more accurate, but you can't organize too many of those. But how many get something on their phone and answer it if they don't recognize whom it's from?
Anymore, yeah. I used to. I have been polled a couple of times.
I have never been polled.
Yeah, now that it's cell phones and it's no. Anyway, we are down to like the last 30 seconds, and I want to thank everybody that's stuck with us through this show. And if you're healthy or can remain healthy for a while and you would like to be part of this show, just text us at kciw.org. Say you're one of the people on the Curry Café. Thanks again for listening.